HTML forms are a way to collect input from your customers, collect data from them. You can also make your web pages interactive with HTML forms. And they're fairly easy to add. All you do is type the form tag, and as usual, close it. And then we're going to add 3 input fields. So I'm going to add a first name input field, input ID equals first name. And then I'm going to add a second input field of ID equals email. And I'm going to add a third one. And this third one, I'm actually going to make it, it's not going to be an input, it's going to be a text area. An input field is a short text block. A text area is a large text block. So you have to actually define how big of a text block it is. So I'm going to say calls for this text area are 30, and rows on this text area, I'll say 4. You can put any number you want in here. The other trick to know is that you can set the rows and columns in your text area and then go in and override it with the CSS, so it can be any width or height that you want. But you should get in the habit of always defining the rows and columns for your text area, just so that you know it'll have a default size if CSS is ever broken or something. You want to close your text area because this is not a singleton tag. And inside the text area, you can actually put text to help people fill in the form. Post your comments. And the last thing you'll want on any form is an input or a submit button. Input ID equals submit. And this one we're actually going to use a new attribute, the type attribute, and say submit. Then when we view the form, we have a 3 input field form and a submit button. However, it's not very useful because these fields don't have any labels. There's no way to know. This one you can guess, post your comments, but what do I type in this one? I could type my phone number or I could type my dog's name. We have to put some labels on this form. So let's go back and add some labels. I'm going to label them with the names at the beginning. So first I'm going to say that this I want your first name. But before I do that, you want to define that this is the label. I'm going to add a tag right before the actual text first name to say this is a label. And I'm just going to say label, because that's the tag. Then I'm going to go to behind the end of the input tag, and I'm going to close that label. This says that this text defines or labels this input field. You can do that for all of your input fields. Label, email, label, comments, and the advantage of this is if you tap on the labeled text, as you notice, the input area turned blue and my cursor is now blinking inside that box. And that means that it's active. It's ready to be typed in. I can type my name in there or whatever. If I click on email, then the email box will be. If I click on comments, then the comments will be. So that's an easy way to get your form more usable as well. Another trick you should know is that you don't actually have to have the label surrounding the input tag. You can put it just around the text that is the label, and then you add the for attribute. And here's where you grab the ID of the element that the label is labeling, and you paste it in the for attribute. This works the same way. When you click on email, it will then highlight the email box. Another problem some people have is that you have this post your comments. Well, a lot of people will then submit a form and they'll have their first name and they'll have their email address, and then their comments will be post your comments. So one way to get around that is to take this text out of the text area and put it in a placeholder. So you open up a placeholder attribute, placeholder, and I'll put post your comments in the placeholder. Then when you preview it, it's still there. It still says post your comments, but when I click on that field and type, it disappears. It's like the field is telling you this is what you want to say, but it's not going to actually send that information to the form. You can do a placeholder for any input field. Placeholder, email address. And as you can see, it's slightly lighter text. and it disappears when you start typing. One thing you'll notice is that these input fields are empty. They don't have an input type. That's because the default input type is text. If you see a form that has type equals text, that's what these blank ones or empty ones are. They're the text field. If you want to change the way that the fields look, you can actually come in and do your styles like you normally would. So you would say input, and I want to make them all a specific width. So I might say a width of 300 pixels. And then when I save it and preview, they're all the same width. Forms are also a place where I really like to use definition lists. You can actually say your labels are the definition term, and the form fields are the definition data. That's one way to make them line up more neatly. You can then style them more easily. It's up to you. Everybody does forms differently, and forms can be fairly challenging to make look nice. So play around with the CSS until you find a value that you like, that looks good. And now you've built your first basic HTML form.